Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the latest in our series of webinars. I'm delighted to introduce today's guest speaker, Ellis Watson. Now, just by way of a brief introduction before I hand over to Ellis. So Ellis spent the first decade of his career working directly for Rupert Murdoch, then went on to run a number of massive PLCs and other global companies. But his last job was to run Simon Cowell's TV empire and record labels all around the world. He's one of just a handful of people who've ever been asked to do 2 TED Talks, and is probably one of the few people who can legitimately claim to have holidayed with Donald Trump. He's also had an audience with the Pope and had a fatwa issued against him. So, as well as all this, he's also been an SJP client for 18 years, and he's agreed to join us today. We've asked Ellis to share some really candid and personal stories from his remarkable and bizarre life for maybe half an hour. But then the really interesting stuff happens when we get to ask Ellis whatever we want. The more direct the question, the better, as Ellis has kindly agreed to answer whatever we want to ask. So to ask your questions, you can simply use the Q&A function, which is on the bottom of your screen if you're on a desktop, or on the right-hand side of your screen if you're on an iPad. And without further ado, I want to welcome Ellis. Please welcome.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you very much for a bizarre introduction. Then I guess it's describing my bizarre life, so I can't really blame you for what you've proved from Tinternet. And thank you, SJP guests and chums, for letting me into your kitchens or your spare bedrooms or whatever intimate space I'm in right now. And for those that I could see on a screen as you were joining, giving me the most bizarre expressions, because I realised that you could see me and I hadn't realised this at the time, you looked at me like you just walked into your actual kitchen late at night in your jammies and found me stroking a much-loved family pet or something like that, like I was the living embodiment of what your mothers warned you about when you were younger. And that's because you've never heard of me or seen me on the telly or something like that. You know, I'm not one of these amazing people that can tell you a fantastic story of when I climbed Everest on one leg or won an Olympic gold medal or as a great politician. These St. James Place webinars, and I've joined a couple, have had great and fascinating people. I'm part of a much more prestigious alumni, to be frank, and they've all had amazing careers. I've been asked here to talk about my career, but I can only do that in the dictionary sense of the word career, Diane, in that it seems to seemingly propel downhill without momentum or control. I think I suspect I've been invited here as a crash test dummy, really, almost like an SJP shipwreck to save you taking your personal lives or your work lives in the rocks of stupidity that I have mine. Because I guess the one distinguishing feature I do have, other than horse worrying looks that not even a mother could love, is I've never, ever knowingly let a lack of ability or experience stop me from trying some of life's challenges. And as a result, I've got an extraordinary experience, if you'll forgive the immodesty, in really cocking up really well. And I guess it's in a life of failing quite well that I've been able to muddle through and have the qualifications to talk to you today as that crash test dummy. So I'm genuinely, and I'm not being falsely modest, you're about to find out if you haven't already, I'm not someone with an innate gift or a real amazing achievement to revere. The Queen told me not to name drop, but I have spent the weekend with Steve Jobs. I've met the Dalai Lama. I've worked directly for 3 billionaires. I've dined with 6 prime ministers. And I've been surrounded by talent so gifted, it makes a bit of wee come out of me to think about how talented they are. But in coming to the end of my career at 55 or 54, I've realized that the only thing that separates them from the likes of me is that they just don't stop trying, and they don't stop failing well, and they don't stop finding out how good they can be. I'm still failing a lot more than I'm succeeding, but I've realized it's the bit of the journey that I enjoy most. And I'm not, therefore, anything that you can say, oh, that was great because he's this thing I can't be or I can learn from as a role model. I'm one of you. There's about 400 of us here joining on screens today, dotted around the country. And I see myself as one of you. It's just that I'm lucky enough to have the microphone, you poor sausages. But I've realized that the reason that SJP have asked me to speak for half an hour is to allow you to interrogate and prod all my fat bits thereafter. And I think that's when it should get quite interesting, because This isn't a story about someone who's achieved something amazing. This is a conversation with 400 other chums to talk about the common bond. So don't forget to turn your mics and cameras off if you need a wee, or better still, just cross your legs and hold it in, because I don't intend to waste a single minute of the 28 I've got left to try and get into the rump of this. Because although we are 400 differently shaped, differently coloured, differently aged people around the UK, with seemingly nothing in common other than the fact that we're, I guess, part of the SJP family, there is a lot more that unifies us right now. And I'll try and talk about the essence of that in the next 25 minutes. Because as the world sort of finds its new normal, as this ghastly phrase keeps saying, and enters a world of slightly sphincter twitching, wobbly financial time with all the global unrest that's there, it's quite hard to feel like we can assert control in our own lives and our own environments and homes, and with our kids, especially our teenage kids or our young adult kids, who are trying to find a way in life in a very different world to the one that we had 20 or 30 or 4 years ago. And whilst it's hard to feel confident about any certainty, I think we can be certain that this ridiculous global and local change is going to be part of everyday life now. And whilst we can't control events, we can control the effect they have on us, because hope is not a strategy, right? And even though people like SJP can be experts with our wealth, we need to become greater experts on our own attitudes towards life. And to do that, I kind of guess I need to explain my credentials, as been asked, and go into some of the more intimate yucky bits of me. Because I was adopted as a 2-year-old orphan, which I know as an introduction to a business speech sounds it's a little bit more like Jerry Springer or Jeremy Kyle, but it's relevant because it kind of, when you look at life through my eyes, makes you realize the inherent argument about whether it's nature or nurture. So the relevance of this is I was adopted as a 2-year-old kid into a perfectly lovely family of parents that already had 2 kids, right? But they couldn't have any more, but they had room in their homes and I guess their hearts for another one. And in the great lottery of life, they got this handsome supermodel in front of you, right? So I had an older brother who was, I think, 6 at the time, Andrew. I had a sister, Juliet, that was 4, and I was adopted into them at 2. And it was a really interesting social experiment I want to share with you, because I had precisely the same chances as them. I had the same education, the same nutrition, the same love, the same nurture. I always knew I was adopted, but never made it feel more different or less different. It's a perfect experiment to see where we'd go in life, right? My brother got a double first at Oxford, a pretty eminent, successful individual, a pretty professional cricketer, and done disgustingly well in life. One of the most eminent people in his profession. My sister, more the educational disappointment, in all honesty, Diane. She only got a first at Oxford, awkward. A pretty professional Wimbledon player herself, and did very well as a medic and other things. I went to Oxford, which is pretty cool, to watch Take That in concert when I was about 16. And I don't want to be immodest or boastful, but I didn't fail a single exam, which sounds pretty cool, until you find out I didn't take one either. I literally did nothing at school. And I say left at 16, I think was asked to leave at 16, and I didn't have a qualification to my name. And my amazing dad sort of pushed me off into the world and said, well, if you're not going to benefit from education, you need to find your own way. And I wasn't slung out of the house because I wasn't a knob or a ghastly child. I just did nothing. And I went to work and I did something boring and I bloody loved it. There were interesting people there. The work I did started off as pretty boring, but I tried to do it to a reasonable high standard. I realized that you should do anything with the same passion that you should do everything. And that sort of inherent drive to try and do the little things in life well made me realize that I totally wasted 16 years. And, I wasn't born again and thought, I must educate myself now, become a better person. I just loved work. I loved people, and I loved dicking about and having fun and just finding out what I could be. And then I would normally at this point, Diane, start talking about what happened from sort of 30 onwards, but I didn't realize that you were going to talk about my decade with Rupert Murdoch. It used to be something up until about 6 or 7 years ago I was very proud of. I did work for Rupert directly for the last few years of my time there. And I joined Wapping as Rupert's sort of first head of digital, ultimately, and his youngest ever director globally. And it was a cool thing. These days, Diane, don't tend to talk about that whole News Corps thing ever since phone hacking. So thanks for that, my head of PR. I did join at the same time as Rebecca Brooks and Andy Coulson, who now is sort of famous, I guess, for whatever reason for going to prison, and Piers Morgan. And the four of us joined at the same time, and to this day remain my closer friends, which is less of a willy wave and more a sad indictment about what rubbish friends I've got, to be frank. Piers was such an awesome best man at my wedding. I got divorced and remarried just to have him back again to do another speech. Andy Coulson, a godfather to my kids and vice versa. As you can see, with me as a dad, my kids have amazing role models in life. My wedding video looks more like an episode of Crime Watch, to be honest with you, than it does of anything more conventional. But it did kind of give me a first decade start in corporate life where, although in hindsight, I was kind of living in the set of Succession, if any of you guys have come across that amazing piece of, I call it a documentary rather than a drama, but it sort of was like that. And as with this and anything else, I don't intend to go into much detail. I'm just merely putting it up there as something for you to shoot down or inquire about when Diane helps take questions. So by all means, type away if there's anything you want to know, and we can talk about it in sort of 22, 23 minutes, that sort of stuff. So I left Rupert by spectacularly self-harming, and I walked off the set and told him to shove his job up his nepotistic arse. And with all the sort of serendipity that tends to follow me about, I landed buttered side up again and took over as MD a small to medium-sized, independently owned television production company that had just happened to have invented Who Wants to Be a Millionaire a few months before I started, and owned by a gifted, brilliant owner called Paul Smith, an incredible television entrepreneur and I guess an impresario. He invented a television format that we've known for whatever it is, 18 years now. So we've become normalized. But in its day, it was the most successful television program in history. And it beat anything beforehand. And I took over the company when it had just got to country number 10 or 15. We just launched in America. And I was charged with taking this extraordinary success and really globalizing it. So I had this amazing hand-picked team. I had this extraordinary quality of life. I was single and busy and had the time of my life, turning left on aeroplanes, going to countries I didn't even know were countries, with queues of people saying, "Hello, here is Czech. I want to make Millionaire." They weren't all French. That's my standard international domestic accent language. But it was amazing. We took Millionaire, I think, to 106 countries around the world. And I had 2.5 years where I was running the world's most profitable television production company, not realizing, to be frank, how lucky I was, working for this wonderful man I frankly wasn't deserving of, having the time of my life. And what was really interesting is it showed you about different cultures, I guess, internationally. America was an interesting one because it took something like 13 episodes before we found a millionaire in the world's largest Western educated free first world country, as we kept dumbing down the questions show after show until we finally found a millionaire. In Japan, I remember going there to Japan for one of the first series. It was brilliant because as I watched an episode being recorded and then the next one the next day, we had it so that one contestant went all the way to the equivalent of £1 million and then lost the money at the last minute. And he said, "Thank you very much," to the host. And then the next day, a lady went all the way, won the equivalent of £1 million and said, "Thank you very much." It was extraordinary. In Colombia, we had 3 kidnappings over the 11 series that we there. It was an utterly bizarre experience. There was a fatwa we can talk about later if we want to, because we accidentally broadcast in parts of the Arab nations that you shouldn't accidentally gamble in, and we were fatwaed against, and I was hunted down for a short while. But it was an amazing role. And with my haphazard life, I was mostly abroad. Okay, my team was in London, and I would come home twice, 3 times, 4 times a month, but then jet off to go and crusade around the world. But it was as I was at a family wedding somewhere in Yorkshire. I was coming down the M1 to go back to Heathrow, to go back out to the States. about 23 years ago, and somebody had broken down. There was quite bad traffic, so I just stopped to help them change their wheel. It was a young woman with a 4-year-old kid, and that should be where the story ended, were it not for the fact that I fell in love. 4 weeks later, we got engaged. I became the daddy to this beautiful little 4-year-old girl. We had a son, and it would be the most beautiful romantic story. Some of the blokes on the screen are probably thinking that I bypassed a whole load of munters along the way because I was some sort of a stalker. Hopefully the ladies joining us would think that romance isn't dead, and there is chivalry and gallantry left in this extraordinary world where gender and sort of kindness can be misinterpreted. The truth is, you're both wrong. Such a romantic story didn't work out. It was a ghastly idea, the worst marriage you could have possibly imagined, for reasons I won't bore you with unless you want to know. But the point of the story is that maybe they want to come back to the UK to be with the kids. And I then took over Mirror Group and had my first public company experience as I was running companies in the UK. And the relevance to that is I then met this amazing woman. She was Scottish, lived up here in Scotland from where I speak to you today. And I came to Scotland almost for the first time to move up here. I bought a little house in Edinburgh because the company I was running up here had offices up here. So I bought a little house at Pied à Terre for me to stay in the week. And that was the time, having first moved to Scotland, because I've met this woman by random on the motorway, that I met my natural dad. Okay, so I'd have been about 30 years old. And I met this beautiful man that behaviourally and facially was my double. And I now look exactly as he did when I met him all those years ago. And I met this wonderful man. And I'd already tried to trace my mum when I was 17 because I had her name and date of birth, and found out that she died only a year before I traced her. So it was wonderful 15 years later to meet this man who was the first blood relative I've ever met as a 30-year-old. And I came to London to meet with him, told him I just moved to Scotland. And I said, well, did you know the woman that you'd had me with passed away? And he said, oh, no, when was that? And I said, well, Kate Barnes, I would have been about 17. She would have been around, she was 15. A Glaswegian lady had me as a 15-year-old. So I said it would have been about 30 years. She would have been about 30 years old, and it was about 20 years ago. And he started to laugh. And it transpired that I had the right name and the right date of birth, and I traced her to find that she'd passed away, but I traced the wrong Kate Barnes. The real woman that had me was not only alive and well, he knew, but she was even living in Scotland, 11 miles from where I was living in Edinburgh. She lived in a little village called Longniddry. Because my dad had found me when I was 18, or found my mum when I was 18, 21 and 30. He'd gone to find my natural mum and say, hi, here's that child that we had all those years ago, got in contact. So bizarrely in life, I'd met a woman, fallen in love, changed my life, moved to Scotland, and found my mum was not only alive and well, but living 11 miles from me, which was quite odd, but has made me realise that there was a reason I felt so in love with Scotland, because I was as Scottish as any of my neighbours are. I mean, that's where that story ends. I didn't marry my sister or something like that, but it is quite interesting to see how these moments of random spontaneity, if you seize them, can lead into all sorts of doors after doors. So I then was running public companies. I took over John Mingy's as it was about to collapse, and we had some fun with that and turned that into a pretty big success. And I was then put on the board of First Group so I could see if I could take over from Samoya, which was the world's largest transport operator. And that was going reasonably well. I was living in North America and making a good fist of things, and we'd managed to turn Greyhound Bus Corporation and a few of the other bigger global assets around. And that's when Simon Cowell asked me if I would take over the Psycho Corporation. I used to see Piers every couple of months because he was running America's Got Talent out there. By the way, it transpires it doesn't after 11 series. I can certainly assert that. So I used to go and see Piers, and we would cock about for the weekend and be silly and get drunk. And one weekend he picked up from LA, refused to tell me the surprise that he'd organised. And this was just before I was due to come back to the UK to take over First Group proper. I was on the PLC board, but this was to take over as COO. And that very weekend that I was moving out of the States to go and take over, Piers drove me to Simon's house, who I'd met a few times, and spent the weekend recruiting me like the Reverend Moon. And that then entered the most bizarre, eclectic year or two of my life, where I was running the Psycho Corporation. Again, it's something that we can talk about when I stop talking in 30 minutes, as much as you and our lovely guests want to, Diane. So I don't want to go into too much detail because it might not be relevant, it might be boring. But I ran Psycho at this extraordinary time where we discovered Susan Boyle with all the madness that came around with that. We were there when we put together that night One Direction that became that phenomenal super group. You're welcome. And it was an extraordinary time to essentially live with Simon almost 24/7, either in Kensington or in Hollywood, and running programs and formats in a digitally changing world where fame and celebrity were a currency in a world that frankly needed authenticity and real values. I was a pretty successful salesman and an exponent of the superficial. And I loved it. And it was amazing. But even at the time, I knew that it wasn't real and it wasn't about me. I was a bit part in this bizarre fairy tale as we were jumping from super yacht to private plane. And it is interesting now, as my life has so fundamentally changed, that I've chosen to walk away and never get seduced by that sort of stuff, because of course it was a privilege to be part of it. It's just a show. It's fluff. It's just people thinking they're more important than they are. And I'll summarize the Psycho thing, unless people want to talk about it in 10 minutes time, by saying with Psycho, in hindsight, there was a clue in the company name, which wasn't Simon. One of the shareholders was Sir Philip Green. And I think history since then has proved himself to be the cockwomble that we know him to be. And although there was a lot of good in him as a shareholder, he was just a horrific individual to serve and made my life personally hell. So I wanted to come back to the UK, become a bit more grounded and pursue a life that had a bit more substance to it without saying it's holier than thou. And it's a substance that really is based upon a mission, which is to live for pleasure alone, which sounds rather hedonistic if you were to take it on a superficial level, but it's not. I kind of live for pleasure alone by choosing to do what makes me happy. And because I suspect a psychologist will say, because I was adopted and I always wanted to be a people pleaser and I was slightly insecure and wanted to be part of my tribe, my version of living for pleasure alone is to please other people, to try and do a bit of good and to try and serve either individuals or charities or your country if you can, and try to turn whatever talents I have learned from these genuinely talented people, where I've just become a bit of a charlatan and borrowed their techniques and some of the ways that they do things, to become a hybrid of all of those good people and put my shoulder behind the wheel of stuff that I like. And a lot of it is hedonistic and lovely and involves sailing and dogs and my friends and my family and just doing stuff that pleases me. But a lot of it is stuff that pleases me because I want to feel good about myself. And in this ridiculously digitally enabled world where we can get satisfaction like this and instant pleasure by meeting someone online or by a whole lot of people following us because they think we're important or successful, my satisfaction doesn't come from any of that stuff. And I think it's a pretty unhealthy thing where so much of our children's generation is telling us that we deserve instant satisfaction, we deserve followers, we deserve friends, and we deserve comfort in life. And I've realized that living for pleasure alone involves voluntarily suffering for stuff that feels good when we get it. I've realized rather too late in life that actually it's not all about standing on top of mountains and going, look, I made it. It's about all the crappy bits along the way where bits hurt and bits fall off. And it's the suffering that gets those brief moments of enjoyment that gets it there. And I desperately worry for the state of society, without sounding like a complete bell end, that actually we're missing on what pleasure is. Pleasure is earning the right or having an arduous journey to get to the occasional glimpse of the nice bits. It's why autoimmune diseases are taking over, because bodies aren't being used to fight off light or to fight off cold or to fight off the wet. And we're not stressing ourselves. So the very physiological mechanisms that are there to try and protect us are starting to fight us because we're not using these things that we have, because we're delegating our life to these crappy bits of glass and metal that we worship as we vicariously watch other people's lives and don't really have one ourselves. So sorry, Diane, I'm sort of going off on one there, but I hope it's something that not only as parents might resonate with some people, but also with us as individuals, because we kid ourselves that we don't watch too much Netflix, or that we don't really look at YouTube, or we don't get addicted to social media. And we do. Even to the smallest degree, it is sapping our energy and stifling our development, not just as a society and as humankind, as tech moves on faster than we're able to cope with it, but as individuals. And I think that's what I'm waking up. So I've got, judging by the amount of questions, and there's a lot of them firing through to you, Dan, so I promise I'll shut up on time in 10 minutes. I think I've learnt 3 things in all of this as I've looked back. As this shipwreck for the SJP guests out there, I guess I'll share with you the 3 things I've shared with my kids from when they were very younger, because I do think it's bewildering to work out what to do in life. I'm well aware that if you're part of the SJP family, you're probably of a certain age and you're probably pretty successful. And that is the great thing about the audience that I've got. You've done pretty well and you've kind of made it to some degree in life. But the crap thing about people like us is that we've done pretty well and we're sort of okay in life. And that means that we don't really do things for the first time. And we don't satisfy that curious itch of finding out what else we could be, especially as we try to conform to be the person that other people think that we are as we're successful. So I said to my kids some time ago, which is no great science to this, but quite an interesting formula. I think it's pretty crap growing up now. I am blessed to be the father of that beautiful 24-year-old now, who I met on the motorway as a first-time stranger when she called me daddy, when I just met her with no genetic inheritance when she was 4. So I know what a life as a 24-year-old, a couple in between, and then the privilege of seeing my beautiful daughter Piper grow up at 5.5. And I would not like to grow up in that age. I think we, to age us all, I'm sure some are a lot younger than me, had it easier, to be frank. So the formula is quite hard to define in this digitally enabled, career confusing, quite vicariously fickle world. So there are 3 rules I've said to the kids. If you can go to bed every day having done 3 things, then your life will be fine. Sometimes 2 out of 3 is okay, but 3 is great. And I'll just summarize them, Diana, and I'll move back to you in about 6 minutes. The first of 3 things to try and do every single day, or at least 2 out of 3, is to make sure that you laugh so much that a little bit of we comes out in you. I must be getting really good at that as I get older, because that happens more and more. But I actually think that you should just put your stupid phones down and be a kid a bit more and just giggle. And I think the older they are, the sillier you should get, the more responsible they are. The more important it is to show people that responsibility doesn't mean that we need to be boring. It actually gives us the privilege of giving some energy to others and getting energy back again. You know, we're all born fairly equal, bald, dribbling, stupid, and incontinent. And if we're lucky, we get about 80 summers and we return to the earth or the crematoria in that same state as bald, dribbling, stupid, and incontinent. But what we do in that time is what makes life a bit more interesting. So I don't think those 80 summers or the lifetime will be marked on how many hours we spend on our phones or on our screens. It'll be marked on how many times we just go, why don't we try something and have a giggle and have some fun? So the first rule is just to have some fun. The second thing, which seems a bit boring, but it's really true, is to be your best. Just be the best version that you can of yourselves and make yourself proud of yourself. And it's not about doing more hours, it's about doing smarter hours. And the older we get, especially if we are like successful people, the more risk adverse we get, okay? And I think you should try it this afternoon. We're going to finish here as a team of lovelies in about 34 minutes and get on with our afternoons. Try this afternoon, do it as an actual thing, as a little social SJP experiment, to be relentlessly positive and efficient and enthusiastic and just throw yourself at your afternoon with a bit more getting jiggy with it. And it's amazing what happens. People react to you differently. First of all, they'll think maybe you've been on recreational drugs for a little while, or you had this strange seminar and you've come out slightly obsessed with a new cult religion from SJP. But after a while, they just go with you. And I think that whole idea of finding out how good you be is amazing. A brief story of this before I wind up in 5, I promise you, Diane. I was always a pretty spectacularly fat kid, and I was fine with being a chubster. I loved my food, and I didn't like sport, and that's the way life was. And my brother, who I told you about, was really sporty, right? Done loads of marathons. And he and a couple of others got together, as we always did every year, no matter where we worked around the world, we'd always come together at this annual dinner. And one of them was saying that they had just turned 50. And in 2 weeks' time, this is 15 years and 4 months ago. I'll tell you why I know that in a minute. But 15 years and 4 months ago, they said that in 2 weeks' time, they're about to do their 20th London Marathon. And they're a little bit disappointed because it was probably going to be the first year in 20 London Marathons, because they got to 50, that they wouldn't be able to do it in under 4 hours, which I imagine is quite depressing if you don't like beer and have no friends. And I said, well, I bet I could do a marathon. I was a little bit squiffy. And they said, well, I bet you can't. And I said 4 words that changed my life. Well, actually, the Chardonnay inside me said 4 words that would change my life. I said, I bet I can. So the next morning, hungover, smelling of curry, all 19 stone of me was greeted by one of them coming into my bedrooms 15 years and 4 months ago and said, good news, fatty, because they were motivators like that. We have got you entry into the Virgin London Marathon in 2 weeks, because they knew somebody and they'd just taken over, which is great. It's really kind of the tossers. So I love this story about doing your best 15 years and 4 months ago, because I was standing on the start line of a marathon looking to all the world like baby Shamu in a wetsuit. I was rammed in lycra, in trainers, and this is entirely true, that had a Woolworths logo on, for that is the last time that I had exercised. And I was standing there shaking, if you'll forgive the turn of phrase, like a Geordie at a maths test. But I learned 3 things that day, my lovelies. I learned as I was standing there, shaking as a 19-stone bifter, I learned 3 things. Fact number 1, this is just like an athletics tip if you're interested. It transpires that sausage and egg McMuffin is not race fuel. I did what can only be known as a Paula Radcliffe along the way, but not quite so elegantly. Fact number 2, again, athletics related, and this is just a free tip if you're interested. Even though they could tell I was nervous, because the people that got me in were the elite runners, so I was right at the front of the pen with the thin whippets. They do not like you smoking at the start line of a marathon. That's just a thing. They get very, very arsey with it. But I also found out 15 years and 4 months ago that despite everything that had befallen me before in terms of lifestyle decisions, I learned this fact after 2 missing toenails, one of which still hasn't come back, nipple chafing, that I don't care what you say, sisters, is way worse than breastfeeding, and the development of Tourette's I didn't know I had until I was halfway around. I found out 15 years and 4 months ago that 19 stone smokers can run a marathon if they use this self-belief thing. Now, that isn't a particularly proud fact, because it was also the same year that the oldest record breaker for running the marathon in London did it. He was 92. By the way, 4 minutes faster than me at 6 hours, 7 minutes. So this was no great attainment, but it did show me that the barriers and the limitations we put on ourselves, as I had done for the previous 30 years, are entirely of your own making. And I have to say, especially as we go through the remnants of COVID to come out of it, the whole bettering yourself physically and putting these horrible devices down and getting out with nature, which sounds a bit hippyish of me, the mental health is an extraordinary link as I've gone on to do different things. And the final one, Diane, and we'll hand back to you in just 3 minutes. The final thing that I say to my kids, as well as having so much fun that you just laugh yourself stupid, as well as trying your best and finding out if you can be a little bit better today than you were yesterday. The third thing is the relentless need to be kind every single day. To me, it's actually a selfish thing. I get a lot of pleasure out of people thinking that I'm a nice person. It sounds really superficial, but try to do the right thing, and that feeds me back. But the reason I want to bring this up now is because the most extraordinary thing happened just a couple of months ago. So I, as I mentioned, fell in love with an individual and her country, Scotland, 25 years ago. And I've lived here ever since. I live in the middle of this beautiful playground in the Highlands. And I've travelled and worked abroad for most of that time. So I used to fly into Edinburgh through London, wherever I was around the world, and come home every week or every fortnight. And in those days, I used to have to go over the Forth Road Bridge, right? And I don't know if you remember it, people on the screen, but up until about 10 years ago when they took the tolls off, they used to have 10 toll booths, 5 either side of the Forth Road Bridge with a little man or a little woman. I don't think they were little, but they sat in a booth and they would charge you £1 to have the privilege of entering the Kingdom of Fife. We like to do that in Scotland. We like taking money off English people. But anyway, every single week, I did this for 10 years that I used to commute. I would always pay for the person behind me. I would get to the barrier, hold the £1 out, look in my rear view mirror, and then say to the person, oh, I completely forgot, that's another £1 for my mate in the red Renault or the blue Ford or the white van. I wouldn't know them from Adam. But every week I would drive off and look in the rear view mirror and have the unique pleasure of seeing someone that I didn't know from Adam, hold their £1 out, have a conversation with the person in the booth, put the £1 up and drive off wondering who the bloody hell it was who paid for them, right? Twice people followed me. In Scotland, I suspect they think it's probably an elaborate tax dodge or something like that. But the point of this story is that 2 months ago, I was in Edinburgh at the EICC, this huge theatre of 2,000 people, and I was speaking to a motor manufacturer that had its European conference. And I told this story. Now, I haven't told this story for at least a decade because it wasn't relevant. The tolls haven't been there for a decade. And I told this story because it was relevant to Scotland and motoring, right? And at questions, Diane, about half an hour later, this woman had her hand up right at the back of the amphitheatre, like it was a paternity suit. I actually didn't know what she wanted to talk about. And she finally got a microphone to her. She said, excuse me, do you have a black Morgan motor car? And I said, no, but I used to a long time ago. And 2 months ago, she said in front of 2,000 other people, oh my God, you paid for my parents about 15 years ago and they still talk about it now. How nice is that? The whole audience melted. I might as well have brought out a little puppy dog on the stage or something like that. But it's that whole thing of doing a nice thing as much as you can just pays back so much. It is unusual as I conclude a speech to wealth management colleagues that I'm advocating giving money away. Luckily, we're represented by people that know how to make some of it for us. But I'll wind up, Dan, and hand back to you because I know we've had a ridiculous amount of questions come in to say that I do think as a formula in life, having a lot of fun every day, doing your best every day, and giving back what there's a desperate shortage of in life increasingly these days, which is a lot more kindness, is the most important formula of all. If you can do 2 of them a day, great. If you do 3 of them every day, it doesn't matter if you're successful or wealthy by design. You'll get there by default if you just follow that formula. It's my formula. It might not work for others, but let's find out. So, Diane, I hope I haven't bored you into submission. It's been so nice to join you and your colleagues on this slightly Greek Scottish day. If you notice, I've actually got a fire on in there. Can you believe it? It's only just gone the summer. Diane, I know we've had a lot of questions. I don't know whether you can curate some of them.
We have had a lot of questions come through, and I think it's only fair to ask one to take you right back to something you started talking about right at the beginning, which maybe you probably didn't want to talk about in detail, but it's quite an interesting one that's come through because obviously you're a really positive person, and from what I can see, you obviously really try to see the positive in everything there. So if you could take one positive thing from your time with Rupert Murdoch, what would it be?
Oh, that's actually very easy, because if I gave the impression that I had a dark time there, it was totally the wrong impression. I loved my time at News Corp. I went up the commercial route, Diane, rather than the editorial route like all my chums did. And I just had the greatest possible career opportunity, because the thing about Rupert is he just wanted people that had potential, that wanted to find out how good they were. I mean, in hindsight, we maybe should have got a few more checks and balances on the way, but we were given quite a lot of latitude and kind of failed well along the way. Rupert allowed us to fail. And I think that's why he went from nothing to billionaire global media top four in just 20 years, because he did understand that it was all about talent. It was all about teams. It was all about getting the right chemistry of people and empowering them. But for me, to be utterly frank, the one obvious good thing, and there were a gazillion, so I can't pretend it was on there under sufferance. I had a great time in the set of succession, as I call it, was the friends that you can make at work. Now, it might be because I started there at 18 that I was that super gregarious sort of personality, this bewildered puppy going, oh, this is amazing. All these lovely, positive, journalistic people, you know, because working on the Sun or the Sunday Times, by definition, they've got lots of interesting things, right? But I realized then that work is about relationships, and it's about finding people that you want to work with and do a good job with and for. And it's that teamwork. And I've cocked up a lot and I've had some bad days of work, but I don't remember one of them because I just enjoy leaning on the strengths of team. And I think that's the one thing that COVID has done. I don't mean it forced us to work from home. I mean, as employers, as I chair a load of companies right now, and I actually get frustrated that employers that say, hey, we want you to come to work a minimum amount of time. People are just doing that minimum in many cases and not going to work more often because they think that it's benefiting from them to be in our own environment, because I can quietly do the ironing at lunchtime, or, you know, because I can walk the dog when I want. And whilst those things are great, the sense of being part of a family at work, I think, is really important, Diana. So to broaden it out, the best thing I learned about Wapping, and there were a gazillion things in a decade there, was about having fun and making friends at work. But as a widening lesson, just to finish off, I think people are missing what they had 4 years ago and 3.5 years ago without realizing that they're missing it. And I think that it's of great shame that corporations are losing one of the most important things on their P&L, which is the energy and creativity of people putting their bums on a desk and go, all right, Julie, how was your weekend? And that's what I think we need to get back more to.
Okay, so we'll try and kind of mix it up a bit between kind of, you know, business related ones and maybe personal questions as well. So this one's kind of sits in the middle a little bit. So if I say the word Charles, the name Charles Ingram to you, does it bring shivers to your spine or make you laugh?
Neither, to be utterly frank. It was an odd time, if you talk about the coughing major, and it was just all part of the insanity that was that sort of life. I wasn't on the studio that night, so I didn't have to endure it. I just picked up the pieces around it as we were dealing with the publicity consequence. But it was an extraordinary thing for us to have this format. But I think then we've done about 60 or 70 countries. Diane, and I think, to my certain knowledge, it was the first and last time somebody has so successfully hacked such a popular format. But no, I almost admire a chancer, to be honest with you, but not someone that breaks the law or nicks money. But no, it doesn't fill me with either of those things. It was just part of the weirdness that is my life.
Was there any lessons learned from that, from a business perspective?
Yeah, I think it's all about reacting to change and not dealing with change like a rabbit in the headlights. And I think that a lot of my friends have been through personal shocks at work when you think of the people that I've worked with. And a lot of the bosses that I've served and shareholders I've served have had some calamitous as well as some extraordinarily successful experiences. But I think the common bond between all of those is how they react to massive change. So I think it's when you do hit adversity, or when you go through some massive period of external change, is to be a bit stoic, which sounds a little bit ethereal because it's, you know, this extraordinary thing that people go to university to understand. But in essence, the stuff that you can't affect, don't give a shit about it. Give a shit about how it affects you. I suspect Marcus Aurelius probably would have summarized it a bit more eloquently than that. But I think in hindsight, a lot of it's to do with just don't fret about the things that you can't change. Just take control of the things that you can, and you can deal with any of those shocks then.
Brilliant. So if we kind of flip it back to the personal side of things, and I can't let this question go, and you'll know why in a second. It says, what was the moment that you realised you personally needed financial advice? I said I couldn't let it go.
Well, I take it you've got access to my accounts and my facility, because the number looks really big until you realize it's got a negative sign in front of it. Oh, wow, what an awesome question. I'll be honest with you, because after your card bounces that many times when you're trying to impress pretty girls or car dealers with your wealth, you realize that Mr. McCorber was right. When the pound sterling and pence coming in are slightly less than the pound sterling and pence coming out, it does make the bum twitch a little bit. And I've realised that I will end up in life with absolutely nothing. There you go. But I'm so sorry. Let me just do
It's
something.
live, don't worry.
That was me being really nice to my dogs, I promise you. I will probably go to this grave with nothing, but it's only because I like to spend it along the way. But SJP has helped me realise that I should probably spend in proportion to what I've got, and God forbid, maybe keep a little bit back for a rainy day. So yeah, I've never really worried about earning. I've only ever worried about having fun and doing the best that I can, and by default, I've been able to, live in lovely places and have nice experiences. But I have realised, actually, and I may be getting a bit old and boring, it's not about stuff. I've realised that as Amazon drivers bring a lot of stuff that is giving people temporary pleasure for a few seconds. But the pleasure is probably more in when they hit buy now as opposed to when they get it. To me, my pleasure is now, and I've learned this far too late in life, about being with your kids and being with your mates and enjoying work time that's meaningful, or, just telling the dogs to shut up. That's what it's all about. So I realised I need to find a job a long time ago, but not because I'd amassed so much money, Diane. I need to be responsible with it. I realised that I was earning a lot of money, but keeping none of it. And you and your colleagues are rather good at helping with that sort of stuff, as you well know. They get to let people
into the secret the secret that you called my dog a cat in a dress-up suit as well. So there you go.
It is. That is a proper
dog. There's a really interesting one that comes through here, and it goes back to kind of what you were talking about in terms of devices and such like before, about technology allows things to be very public now. So, and does it make us more aware of what we're doing and what people are seeing of us? Is it the same for you? Does it make you more hesitant or influence your decisions?
I have never, ever, despite my rampant ego, sought out any kind of digital presence. And I don't frankly know why. I was always part of the digital revolution in the early days. I was Rupert's first head of digital. I was rushing about like chicken licking, 30 years ago, saying we're about to be old media, as I was running The Sun, the world's largest English-speaking daily newspaper. I was convinced the internet was going to knock us out in years. I was right, but only out by about a decade. But I worked out, and I don't know why I did, but I think these things, perhaps when I was about 20, unless they had a breathalyzer in, it probably wasn't a good idea for me to have I don't have much of a connectivity between here and my gob. To have no connectivity between here and my comments and opinions and stupid drunken acts living in cyberspace forever. I don't know what it was that did it, but I think the digital revolution is marvelous. And, you'd be an idiot to deny its import. But there are some consequences, especially for our children's generation, Gen Z, that mean that these become too ubiquitously important. The point that you make about things being public, I think, is largely a good thing. Unfortunately, the digital revolution has almost killed independent journalism, something that's desperately important to keep society free. You only have to look at Russia to see the consequence when you don't have a free media, without which you sound like a Puritan. We have something like 1/6 of the journalists today that we had 5 years ago, and 1/60th of what we had 20 years ago. It's that decimated. So the power of this stuff to pervade the truth is important, but unfortunately, to wade through the truth, you have to go through a lot of crap. When it comes to stuff existing in cyberspace, it's actually a good thing. But we were always taught a long time ago, whatever you write or whatever you say, and I'm saying before the internet, imagine that you're going to read about it in Nigel Dempster's column in the Daily Mail 30 years ago, which is what we were told as we fell out the Groucho at 2 a.m, or, we're being general idiots. So I actually think that the digital revolution is an amazing thing. There are some bad consequences about the ubiquity of it all. But when it comes to the public nature of such stuff, one is largely in control. One just doesn't exercise control, either because we don't use privacy filters or we don't use common sense filters because we somehow thought it was funny to flash naked through the ski resort and put it up on YouTube until our next employer tries to look through social media and go, do we want them to be our head of customer services? Perhaps not.
Brilliant. And interesting what you say about lack of journalists. I think there might be one person as of yesterday who's on the list looking for a new journalism job. Might have been in Balmoral yesterday, maybe. But if we kind of dig a little bit deeper into your interaction in the boardroom and that particular side of your career. So when you move an idea away from the boardroom, how do you decide what's worth the risk? Is it a case of, is a personal thing, or does it often feel like a bigger risk than it actually is when you go down that route?
I've only ever really been asked by shareholders to make a company that's in trouble go to a better place, or represent a company that has done quite well, but it's not reaching its potential. So by definition, and you can apply this to the past as opposed to it was a pre-planned thing, I'm more of a disruption change merchant in the way that I've been a chief exec. So I need to be a bit careful, right? Because I'm representing often billions of pounds of shareholder value and my own job and the livelihood of my employees. So the things that I deploy are a lot more science than people realize. If you just start and stop with the numbers, the P&L will normally show you, not in some fancy spreadsheet, but you just knock it out on a flip chart on what the Mr. McCorbers say a big idea will be. The second thing I do is make sure my team are not blowing smoke up my bum. All right? Being a quite demonstrative, strong, allegedly strong, charismatic leader can be quite terrible because people don't think they have permission to challenge you. They go, oh, this is good. We're part of the Ellis team. We're going with this. This is lovely. Right, we're good because I'm a bellend and 3 out of the 4 things that I say are going to be fairly stupid. It's our job to work out what the 4th one is. So I think the data has always served me, and having an amazing CFO has always been a right secret weapon to me. And secondly, to have a team of people that are really good challenging friends. And if I ask for feedback after even just a board meeting, even if it's not a big decision, the only feedback I want is where could I or we have been better? I don't want someone to say that I was lovely or funny or we had a super board. I want someone to go, where could we have been better? Sometimes there's not a lot of stuff, but sometimes you think, wow, that was, yeah, you were honest. But that way you can reflect on it and go, yeah, they were right. I'll be a little bit better tomorrow.
I'm conscious we're kind of coming to the end, so I'll try and fit 2 in, but I'm going to ask one question which I think encompasses a few of the different things that are being asked on the questions just now. And that relates to kind of you and how you've helped businesses, etc. If all of the businesses you'd worked for could say 3 things about you that meant that you were the person who helped them turn things around, what would it be?
In real life, or what I would have liked it to be?
In real life, what would they actually say made the difference?
The fact that it was probably a different formula, the fact that we looked at life with a different energy or through a different lens and we tried to work out what different looked like. I don't want change for change's sake, but people often do things with a P&L because it's always been what's made them successful. And that can often, in such a fast-moving world where capital and brand and the digital revolution means allegiances can move really quickly, doing the same thing actually that was successful yesterday might make us bad today. So I think disruption, where it's relevant, is really, really helpful, and not being complacent. I think secondly, not convincing yourself that you're really that good is important. Successful companies have a horrible complacency to them. And it really, really sticks out after all because they become lazy, and they become lazy as employers, and they believe their own self-import. I think that's a bit crap. And then the third thing I'd like to think they would say, and I think it's incredibly important, is that you genuinely do take care and love the people that you are lucky enough to have work for you. A lot of people in SJP, and I've done a few client events, a lot of people are entrepreneurs who have their own or have a bit of their own organization. Right? There's a lot of entrepreneurs in your network. And the common bond I've noticed is whether they're mercenary and whether they are like really, really dynamic in their driving of things or not, they all, I think, to a man and a woman, seem to appreciate that it's all about the qualities of their team. And if you don't recruit well, or you take them for granted, or you don't get the best out of them, then you're just a prat. And you don't deserve that sort of talent. You won't get the best. You know, people think the competitive edge is about how many people you employ or what your costs are and that sort of stuff. But you can either make someone do an okay job or an absolutely awesome job. And the difference between okay and awesome is not down to them. It's down to how you get the best out of them or not. And I don't want to work for someone I don't think is awesome. And if someone is on this call is lucky enough to employ people, they might pay them a fortune. They might resent the fact they cost a fortune, especially today, because my God, is it a talent market despite the economy. I can't get anything like the people for half the price I could just a year or two ago, even pre-COVID. Is I like to think that someone is going to come and work for me because they think I'm going to get the best out of them because I want the best for them. So to me, that's the third and most important dynamic of all. Yeah, you've got to recruit well and you've got to run a P&L well, but you've got to make sure that you are giving everyone that works for you the opportunity of finding out how good they can be. And you do that by appreciating them and pushing them and being a challenging boss, but in a really appreciative one.
Brilliant. So final question, and I think this probably covers both personal and business and, you know, what's been a hugely varied career for you. And it's that question that we all hate being asked, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Of all the people you've spent time with over those years, if you could choose 3 to have dinner with, who would they be and why?
Oh, you horrible, horrible, horrible woman. I think the first one would almost certainly have to be Paul Smith. Not the man that made Suits, but the man that made Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and a lot of other great telly. Because he gave me opportunities and could have taught me stuff that if I was a better listener, I would have said thank you for and listened to a bit more. And that's something that I would love to do at a dinner party. I think the second person I'd love to have around is Simon, just because I'm lucky enough to still have him occasionally in my life. But as someone who just truly was a gorgeous but entirely bonkers human being, Simon Cowell is just a radiator and not a drain. I mean, to avoid doubt, a nightmare, but a beautiful nightmare to have around. And I think he'd be pretty good at a dinner party. And I think finally Rupert, actually, because at 80 whatever he is, he still would make pretty impressive dinner party company. He would almost certainly tell me to chew my food more and to eat less and do all the other things he did all those years ago. And I'd also be able to go, by the way, Jerry Hall, what's all that about? I mean, why say no to that? So I think once I had a dinner party with those 3 and met Rupert's next supermodel partner at dinner, I think it will be a fairly interesting way of having not a bad night out. You're very welcome to come, Diane, and all the people on the screens too.
I think that would be one of the best nights out for all of us. But Ellis, it's been an absolute pleasure. Big thank you from me and all of us at SJP. And I think that there's 3 things that I've got to leave us with, which I think hopefully should resonate with everybody in there. Ellis's 3 rules, and that's have fun, be the best version of you, and always be kind. Ellis, thank you very much. Look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Cheers, Dan. Bye, Dan.
Thank you.